When my ex-wife and my only son finally stood on my doorstep again after 7 years of silence, it was like seeing ghosts. They were thinner, dressed worse, but their eyes went straight past me to the house, to the cars, to the life I had built from the ashes they left behind. When they said, "Richard, we need your help, just until we get back on our feet," I smiled, stepped aside, and closed the door in their faces. Tell me, if the people who abandoned you at your lowest came crawling back when you were rich again, what would you do? Before I tell you what I did, read this to the end, and then tell me honestly if I went too far. Share what you would have done in my place. I still wake up some nights wondering if I crossed a line. My name is Richard Lewis. I'm 68 years old, a retired construction contractor turned real estate investor, and a grandfather of 2 children who barely know me. I spent 40 years building homes and small office parks around Ohio, thinking I was building a fortress for my family. When the fortress collapsed, my wife Laura and my son David didn't just walk away, they pushed me into the rubble to climb out themselves. This is the story of how I went bankrupt, watched my family abandon me, rebuilt everything from nothing, and then chose to abandon them when they came back with their hands out. I used to believe that if a man worked hard enough, the world would meet him halfway. My father put a hammer in my hand when I was 12, and by the time I turned 30, I had my own crew, my own trucks, my own name on the sides of them. Lewis Contracting, white letters on blue steel. I still remember the first time I saw my trucks lined up in the dawn light, my men clutching coffee in gloved hands, exhaust fogging in the cold air. That was the moment I felt I'd become someone. Laura liked that version of me. The man who could slide a check across a restaurant table without looking at the total. The man who could sign David up for every baseball camp, every tutor, every private lesson. She loved the safety of it, or maybe the image. David grew up in that safety like a plant under glass. Private school, college paid in full, a brand new car when he turned 21. I told myself I was giving him everything I never had. I didn't notice I was also taking away the one thing I did have, the understanding that money is never guaranteed. Then the recession came. It started with one developer pulling out of a subdivision halfway through. Suddenly, I had concrete poured, frames half raised, and no one to pay the invoices. Then the bank tightened its terms. Then another developer called and said, "We're putting everything on hold for 6 months, maybe a year." You can brace for storms in construction, wind, rain, snow. You cover the lumber, you tarp the foundation, you delay the pour. You can't brace for the phone to stop ringing. I held out as long as I could. I took on smaller jobs, renovation work, anything to keep the crew busy. I stopped taking a salary. I sold the spare truck. I maxed out the line of credit to pay my men because I couldn't stand the thought of Joe or Carlos going home to their kids and saying, "Dad's out of work because Richard couldn't manage his business." For a while I told Laura as little as possible. "It's just a rough patch," I'd say, forcing cheer into my voice as I loosened my tie after another meeting with a banker who looked at me like a dying animal. "We've seen worse." But the numbers don't lie, and they don't care about optimism. The night I told Laura we were going to have to sell the house, she stared at me across our granite kitchen island, like I had confessed to a crime. "Sell the house?" she repeated, the wine glass in her hand trembling ever so slightly. "Richard, we raised David here." "I know," I said, "but the business is bleeding. If we sell now, we can cover most of the debts and keep the bank from taking everything. We can rent for a while. Start over." "Start over," she said, like the words tasted sour. "At our age?" I was 61 then. Not young, but not dead. Not yet. When the bankruptcy court date came, neither she nor David came with me. I walked into that gray, echoing room alone, carrying 4 decades of my life in a thin folder. A judge I'd never met glanced at 12 pages and decided I was finished. "Lewis Contracting, LLC is hereby declared bankrupt," she said, her voice flat. Assets are to be liquidated to satisfy creditors as outlined. Just like that. A stamp on paper, a life's work erased. On my way out, I stopped in the hallway to catch my breath. My chest felt tight, my legs hollow. I had to lean against the cold wall, staring at the scuffed linoleum, thinking, this can't be it. I drove home in silence, my hands numb on the steering wheel. The house looked the same from the outside. Trim hedges, clean siding, the porch swing Laura had wanted, but it already felt like it belonged to someone else. Laura was waiting for me at the kitchen table, a manila folder in front of her. David sat beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight. He was 34, with my dark hair and her eyes, wearing a shirt that probably cost more than my suit. "How did it go?" Laura asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's done," I said, hanging my jacket on the back of a chair. "We're officially bankrupt." David exhaled loudly, like I'd confirmed his worst suspicion about me. "So you lost everything," he said. "Years of telling me you knew what you were doing, and you lost everything." I swallowed. "I lost the company, yes. We still have the house for now. We have some savings. We'll have to be careful, but—" "Careful?" he cut in. "You had one job, Dad, provide. You spent your whole life lecturing me about responsibility, and then you gamble our future on one stupid business." I stared at him. The boy whose Little League trophies I'd lined up on a shelf. The teenager I'd taught to drive in the empty parking lot by the lumberyard. The man I thought I was raising to be better than me. "It wasn't a gamble," I said quietly. "It was my work. Our income. The market crashed. Things I couldn't control. That's the thing," David said, leaning forward, eyes burning. "You always act like the victim, like you had no choice. Well, guess what? I have a choice." "David," Laura murmured, but there was no real protest in her voice. He turned to her, then back to me. "What's in the folder?" Laura slid it toward me without a word. Divorce paperwork, her name in neat print, mine beside it. The woman I'd been married to for 38 years, the mother of my son, had done her own quiet liquidation. "I can't do this," she said, finally looking at me. "I can't go from this." She gestured around at the kitchen, the stainless steel appliances, the high ceiling. "To some apartment. I can't start over like some 20-year-old. "So you'd rather start over with nothing?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "With no husband, no house, no partner?" She flinched at the word partner, then straightened. "I need stability, Richard. My sister offered me a room for a while. David and Emily have room too. We'll figure it out. It's just, I can't stay and watch you fall apart." David cleared his throat. "Dad, look. I'm not in a position to bail you out. I've got a mortgage, kids, responsibilities. You made these choices. You'll have to deal with them." I stared at my son. "I'm not asking you to bail me out," I said. "I'm asking you not to throw me away." He looked away. "It's not like that." But it was exactly like that. 2 months later, the house was gone. The company was a memory on paper, and the woman who'd once promised to grow old with me was living in her sister's condo in Florida. David stopped answering my calls. Texts went from short replies to silence. I ended up in a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, the kind of place where the hallway always smelled like other people's cooking and the elevator made a grinding noise every time it moved. I slept on a second-hand mattress on the floor, my clothes in cardboard boxes. The only piece of my old life that followed me intact was my old black F-150, too old and ugly for the bank to bother repossessing. The first night there, I lay awake listening to footsteps and muffled arguments through thin walls, and something inside me cracked. Not the way it had cracked in the courtroom or at the kitchen table. Those had been clean breaks. This was a slow, grinding fracture, the realization that the people I'd worked for my whole life would rather see me disappear than see me struggle. At 61, I started over. No one wanted to hire a bankrupt contractor as a manager, but plenty of people needed labor. I took a job as a night janitor at a hospital. It was the only thing I could find that didn't ask too many questions about my past. From 11 at night to 7 in the morning, I pushed a cart down bright corridors, mopping up other people's messes. You learn a lot in hospitals at night. You learn what real emergencies look like. You learn how small money is next to a flatline. You also learn how strong you are when no one is watching. During the day, when I wasn't sleeping, I read. I studied everything I could about the one thing that had always made sense to me: land. Markets fail, companies fold, but land doesn't move. It just waits. One afternoon, about a year into the night shift, my old foreman, Joe, called me. I hadn't heard his voice since the company dissolved. "Rich," he said, "you still breathing?" "Last I checked," I said. "You?" "Working for a new outfit," he said. "Small commercial firm. They took me on as a supervisor. We're bidding on a warehouse job out by the new interstate loop. Owners, some logistics company from Chicago. They need someone who can redesign the site plan to save them money on grading and utilities. I told them you were the best I ever saw." I almost laughed. "Joe, I'm a janitor now." "So?" he said. "Brains don't get repossessed." He wore me down. I went to the meeting on my day off, wearing the one suit I hadn't sold. The developer, a sharp-eyed woman named Monica Hughes, looked at me skeptically over the conference table. "You're the bankrupt contractor," she said without malice, just stating a fact she'd obviously dug up. "Yes," I said, "which is why I know exactly how and why projects go wrong. You want to save 30% on this build? Move your loading docks to the north side, cut that unnecessary retaining wall, and tie into the existing storm sewer instead of building a new one." I took her through the numbers. Every dollar, every cubic yard of soil, every length of pipe. The old language came back to me like a song I hadn't sung in years. When I finished, she sat back, arms folded. "And why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," I said bluntly. "Not yet. Hire me as a consultant on this one job. Pay me a small retainer and a piece of whatever I save you. If I don't deliver, you can tell every developer in the state that I wasted your time." Something in that answer must have appealed to the part of her that liked risk. She agreed. Over the next 8 months, I poured everything into that project. Nights at the hospital, days on the site and in the engineer's office, living on coffee and the stubborn fury that had taken root in my chest. We shaved hundreds of thousands off the budget. The warehouse went up on time and under cost. At the ribbon cutting, Monica pulled me aside. "How much did you say you were making at that hospital?" I told her. She laughed softly. "You're done with that. Come work for me, full time. I need someone who can see around corners." She hired me as director of site development. Salary, benefits, bonuses. It wasn't the empire I'd lost, but it was a ladder. I started climbing. I didn't forget what I'd learned, though. I didn't buy a new car. I didn't upgrade my apartment. Instead, I whispered to myself the same phrase every time I got a paycheck. Land doesn't move. While we were building warehouses for other people, I started buying the scraps around them. The parcels too small or oddly shaped for big developers to bother with. A triangle between an off-ramp and a drainage ditch. A skinny rectangle behind a distribution center. A field no one wanted because it flooded every spring. I did my homework. I read zoning codes like novels. I sat in city planning meetings after work, listening, taking notes. When the town extended a water line, I knew about it. When they rezoned from agricultural to light industrial, I knew about that too. Over 5 years, those scraps became something else. A small truck parking lot that rented out spaces to independent drivers. A fenced storage yard for a landscaping company. A simple concrete pad with hookups that we leased to a food truck commissary. Little cash flows, humble and steady. Monica noticed. "You're building your own portfolio," she said one evening as we watched surveyors stake out another site. "I'm trying to make sure I never sit in a bankruptcy courtroom again," I replied. She nodded. "Smart." When I turned 65, she offered me a partnership. Not in the company, we both knew those days were behind me, but in a new venture, an industrial park outside Columbus. anchored by 3 big warehouses and ringed by the kind of smaller parcels I'd been collecting. "You put in your land," she said. "We put in capital and construction. We split the rents." I ran the numbers 3 times. If it worked, it would more than replace everything I'd lost. Not overnight, but over years, like a slow tide coming in. I said yes. The project was a success. Tenants lined up. Suddenly, the man who'd once mopped hospital floors for $10 an hour was getting wire transfers with more zeros than his old paychecks had combined. I bought a house again, not a mansion, a solid brick place on a hill with a view of the river, a big oak tree in the backyard, and a porch where I could drink coffee in the morning. I furnished it carefully, choosing things for comfort, not for show. I also bought something else. Silence. No more calls from creditors. No letters demanding payment. No more waking up at 3 in the morning wondering if the bank would change the locks. 7 years passed from the day I signed those bankruptcy papers. 7 years of work, humility, and rebuilding. 7 years without a single call from my son. I learned from mutual acquaintances that David had been promoted in his firm, then later laid off when they merged with another company. I heard, in fragments, that he'd tried to start a marketing agency that never quite got off the ground. That he and his wife Emily had bought a bigger house than they could really afford. That the private school for my grandchildren, Lily and Mason, cost more per year than my first house. No one ever asked if I could come to a birthday party. No one invited me to school plays. On holidays, I sat alone at my new wooden table, carving a small turkey breast for myself, telling myself I preferred the quiet. I almost believed it. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, as the sun slanted through my office windows and lit up the framed site plans on the wall, my past knocked on my door. Literally. The receptionist buzzed in. "Mr. Lewis? There's a woman here to see you. Says she's your wife." My first thought was that there had been some mistake. Then I heard the heels in the hallway. That soft, rapid click I'd once been able to recognize from across a crowded room. Laura stepped into my office like she still owned the right to be there. Time had been kind to her in some ways, unkind in others. Her hair was shorter, dyed a shade too dark for her skin. The lines around her mouth had deepened, carved there by years of tight smiles. She wore a cream-colored blouse and a skirt that tried very hard to look expensive and almost succeeded. Behind her, hovering in the doorway, was David. He looked older than his 41 years. The sharpness in his eyes had dulled, replaced by something jittery and watchful. His suit was a half-step shabbier than he probably wanted it to be, the cuffs shiny from wear. "Richard," Laura said, stopping in the middle of the office. "My God, look at you." I rose slowly from my chair. "Hello, Laura." "Hello, David." David's gaze flicked around the room, cataloging the polished desk, the leather chairs, the framed photos of completed projects. I could almost see the arithmetic running behind his eyes. "So it's true," he said. "You landed on your feet." I gestured to the chairs in front of my desk. "Have a seat." Laura sat immediately, crossing her legs. David hesitated, then followed. For a few moments none of us spoke. I watched them the way I'd learned to watch lenders and partners, looking for tells. Laura's fingers twisting the strap of her purse. David's foot bouncing once, then stilling when he realized I'd noticed. Finally, Laura cleared her throat. "You look well," she said. "Better than the last time you saw me," I replied. She winced slightly. "Richard, we didn't come here to rehash the past." "No?" I leaned back. "Why did you come?" David folded his hands as if he were about to present a business proposal. "We've had a run of bad luck," he began. "My company downsized, and the startup I joined afterward didn't pan out. The economy—" I actually laughed then, a short, humorless sound. "The economy," I repeated. I remember that excuse. Color rose in his cheeks. "This isn't easy for me, you know." "It was easy enough for you 7 years ago," I said. "Sitting at that kitchen table telling me I'd made my bed." Silence. Laura shifted uncomfortably. "We were scared," she said. "We didn't know what to do. Your bankruptcy, the house, the creditors. It was all so overwhelming." "So you overcame your fear by leaving," I said softly. "I remember." David exhaled. "Can we please not do this?" he said. "We're here because we need your help, Dad." The word Dad hit me like a stone thrown from a great distance. "You haven't called me that in years," I said. "Not to my face, anyway." He swallowed. "We're in trouble," he said. "The bank is foreclosing on the house. We're behind on the kids' tuition. There are medical bills from when Lily broke her arm last year, and Emily's mother needed surgery, and it's a lot. We're drowning." "And you thought of me," I said. "Now." Laura leaned forward, eyes shining with something that might have been tears. "Richard, look around you," she said. "You're obviously doing well. We're not asking for a handout, just a loan, something to get us back on our feet. We'll pay you back every cent." "Like you paid back the years?" I asked quietly. Her lips pressed together. "This bitterness doesn't suit you," she said. "You've always been a good man, a generous man. You wouldn't let your own son and grandchildren end up on the street." "Have you told the grandchildren I exist?" I asked. That did it. Both of them flinched. "We didn't want to confuse them," Laura said. "After everything, it seemed better to keep things simple." "Simple," I repeated. "So what do they know? That I left you? That I died? That I never cared?" David looked away toward the window. His jaw clenched. "We might have implied that you weren't around," he muttered. "It was easier than explaining that you'd failed." There it was, the word he'd been saving. Failed. I sat there looking at the two people who had once been my entire world, and felt something inside me go very still. "How much do you need?" I asked. Laura blinked, surprised. We brought some numbers," she said quickly, pulling a folder from her purse. "The mortgage is 6 months behind. If we can just bring it current, the bank will work with us. The tuition, we could maybe negotiate a payment plan if we had a lump sum to show good faith. And the medical bills." "Total?" I interrupted. She glanced at David. He cleared his throat. "280,000, he said. The number was large, but not impossible for me anymore. I could have written a check on the spot. I didn't. Instead, I stood and walked to the window. Outside, I could see the industrial park spreading out toward the highway. Trucks moving in and out, drivers going about their business, contractors I'd hired finishing landscaping on the far lot. A world I had built with hands that everyone had assumed were finished. "I'm not saying no," I said at last, still looking out. "Not yet. Give me a week to think about it." "A week?" Laura repeated. "Richard, the foreclosure sale is scheduled in 10 days. "Then it's a good thing I said a week and not 10 days, I replied, turning back. David stood up. "Thank you," he said stiffly. "Really, I know this isn't easy for you either." He held out his hand. I stared at it for a heartbeat, then shook it. His grip felt weaker than I remembered. Laura rose more slowly. "You always were a decent man," she said, her voice soft. "I knew you wouldn't abandon us." I didn't answer. I watched them leave my office, watched the door close behind them, and felt my heart pounding in my chest like it had the night the judge declared me bankrupt. Only this time, the fear was mixed with something sharper. Not hatred. I don't have enough energy left in my old bones for hatred. Something closer to clarity. For 7 days I thought about what to do. On the second day, I drove past David's house. Or rather, what had been his house. It was bigger than the one we'd lost, with white columns and a manicured lawn. The kind of place people buy when they want to prove something to the world. A foreclosure notice was taped to the front door, pink against the dark wood. On the third day, I called an old acquaintance from the bank that held the mortgage. We spoke in numbers and legal terms for 20 minutes. When I hung up, I knew exactly how deep David's hole was, and how many times he'd refinanced to climb into it. On the fourth day, I sat in my car outside Lily and Mason's school as they poured out of the doors with their classmates, kids in uniforms laughing, jostling, shouldering backpacks. I recognized my grandchildren instantly, even from a distance. Lily had Laura's hair, long and dark. Mason had David's ears. They didn't recognize me. Why would they? I stayed in the car, watching them climb into a silver SUV driven by Emily, my former daughter-in-law. She looked worried, tired, like someone who'd spent too many nights staring at numbers that didn't add up. On the fifth day, I made an appointment with my lawyer. He was a quiet man, mid-50s, with kind eyes behind thick glasses. We'd drafted my will a year earlier, leaving most of my holdings to a foundation I'd set up to fund scholarships for kids from working-class families who wanted to study trades. At the time, I'd left a small portion to David and the grandchildren. I want to make some changes, I told him. He glanced at the file. Major changes? Yes, I said. Major. On the sixth day, I drove to my old neighborhood, the one where Laura and I had lived before everything fell apart. The house we lost had been painted a different color, the porch swing replaced, the tree in the front yard cut down. The new owners had put a stone lion by the walkway, guarding a home that had never been theirs in the first place. I sat there for a while, remembering the sound of David's laughter in that yard, the way Laura's hand felt in mine on summer evenings. Then I drove away. On the seventh day, I made my decision. That evening, as the sun began to set, painting the river gold, I called David. "Meet me tomorrow," I said. "Bring your mother. There's a restaurant on the hill overlooking the city. 6 o'clock. Does this mean? It means I'll give you my answer then, I said, and hung up. Here's where you might think the story is headed for a simple ending. A forgiving father, a tearful reunion, a check slid across a table. But that's not what happened. Because somewhere between bankruptcy court and that office where they asked for my help, I stopped being the man who would hurt himself to save people who had shown him nothing but contempt. And I realized I had an opportunity, not just to say no, but to make sure they understood exactly what they had thrown away. So what did I do? I bought their debt. 3 days before our dinner, after that call with the banker, I signed a stack of documents that made me, through a holding company, the owner of David's mortgage and most of his outstanding personal loan. It cost me a fraction of what he originally owed thanks to the bank's eagerness to get a non-performing loan off its books. In plain terms, I now held the paper on my son's house. I could have used that power to crush him outright, to move the foreclosure sale up, to send sheriffs to his door. I didn't. That kind of brute cruelty never appealed to me. Instead, I decided on something else. The next evening, I arrived at the restaurant 10 minutes early. It was a place I'd frequented with Monica and our partners, a glass-fronted building with a view of the city lights, white tablecloths, quiet music. The kind of place Laura used to love. When they walked in, I saw that she had dressed carefully. Pearl earrings, a blouse that flattered her figure, makeup applied with a shaky hand. David wore the same suit he'd had on in my office, but this time the collar was a bit more rumpled, the tie a little crooked. "Dad," he said, forcing a smile, "this place is nice." It seemed appropriate, I replied. We were led to a table by the window. The waitress took our drink orders. David ordered a beer. Laura chose white wine. I asked for water. My heart didn't need any encouragement to race tonight. Small talk died quickly. None of us had the energy for lies. "So," Laura said finally, setting down her menu, "have you made a decision?" "Yes," I said. "I have." I reached into my jacket and took out 2 envelopes. One thick, one thin. I placed them carefully on the table between us. "The thin one," I said, tapping it. is for you, David. The thick one is for both of you." They stared at the envelopes like they might bite. "Go ahead," I said. "Open the thin one first." David hesitated, then slipped his thumb under the flap and pulled out a set of documents. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. I watched the color drain from his face. "What is this?" he whispered. "That," I said, "is a notice from the holder of your mortgage and personal loan. Effective as of 3 days ago, those debts were assigned to a new creditor, a holding company." "What holding company?" he demanded, though I suspected he already knew. "One I own," I said, "which means that as of now, I am the one you owe money to. Not the bank, not some faceless institution. Me." Laura's eyes widened. You bought his debt?" "I did," I said, "at a discount. One of the perks of having cash when other people are desperate." David's hands shook. "So what? You're just going to foreclose on us yourself?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "That would be cruel. I'm not interested in throwing your children out into the street. Which brings us to the second envelope." I slid the thicker one closer to Laura. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside were several documents. At the top, a contract. "I'm offering you a choice," I said quietly. "That contract says that I will forgive your entire debt, mortgage, loans, everything, in full. I will also pay Lily and Mason's tuition through high school, directly to the school, not through you. In exchange, you will both sign the rest of the documents in that envelope." Laura swallowed. What are they?" "Legal acknowledgments," I said. "Statements that you voluntarily deserted me during my bankruptcy, that you misrepresented my character to my grandchildren, that you cut off contact, not the other way around." David's eyes flashed. "You want us to humiliate ourselves on paper?" "I want the truth on paper," I said, "for the record, for the day when Lily and Mason, as adults, wonder what really happened. I want them to be able to read the story without the lies you told to protect your pride." Laura paged through the documents, her breathing quickening. "And these last pages?" "Those," I said evenly, "formally remove you both from my will and any claim on my estate, present or future. You will acknowledge that you abandoned any moral or emotional right to my support when you left me to face bankruptcy alone. In return, I will make sure your children are provided for and that you have a roof over your heads, for as long as you can keep them without my help." David stared at me. "You're disowning us." "I'm recognizing reality," I said. "You disowned me 7 years ago. I'm just giving it a legal framework." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "Richard, this is monstrous," she whispered. "You're asking us to sign away our family, our relationship with you, in exchange for money?" "You did that already," I said quietly. "Except there was no money involved, just convenience. I'm offering you something you never offered me, a choice." "If we don't sign?" David asked. "Then I remain your creditor," I said. "I will not foreclose immediately. I will not send men to your door. I will, however, treat you like any other debtor who refuses a generous settlement. Interest will continue to accrue. Eventually, the law will do what it does." Silence settled over the table like a heavy cloth. "Why the tuition?" Laura finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you hate us so much, why help the children?" "Because they are innocent," I said. "Because they didn't choose to be cut off from their grandfather. Because I remember what it was like to grow up without much, and I won't punish them for your choices." David's jaw clenched. "And what about us?" I met his eyes. You made it very clear at that kitchen table that you believed a man should live with the consequences of his decisions, I said. I have spent 7 years living with mine. Now it's your turn. He pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Other diners looked over. You're doing this to get revenge, he said. You could just help us. You have the money. You're choosing to make us grovel. I shook my head. No, I said. Revenge would be letting you drown and enjoying the sight. This is something else. I'm throwing you a life preserver that doesn't include me on the rope. Laura stared at the documents for a long time. I watched her eyes move over the words, watched the war inside her between pride and desperation. We need time to think, she said finally. You have 48 hours, I replied. After that, the offer expires. The debts revert to standard terms. I go back to being just another name in the paperwork. She nodded slowly, gathered the documents back into the envelope, and stood. David remained sitting, breathing heavily. Dad, he said suddenly, the word tearing out of him. Yes? Do you really hate us that much? I looked at my son, the boy who had once clung to my leg when frightened, the man who had once looked me in the eye and called me a failure to justify leaving me behind. I don't hate you, I said. Hatred takes energy I don't have anymore. I'm done. That's all. Done trying to prove my worth to people who only see my value in dollars. He flinched as if I'd struck him. Laura put a hand on his shoulder. Come on, she said softly. We need to talk. They left together, walking out into the fading light. I watched them go, feeling a familiar ache in my chest. Not the sharp pain of betrayal this time. Something duller, heavier, loss maybe, or acceptance. I paid the bill and drove home in the dark. 2 days later, a courier arrived at my office with the envelope. The papers were signed, every page. My lawyer filed them that afternoon. The debts were forgiven. The tuition payments were set up. My will was updated to exclude them, leaving everything instead to the foundation and, in a separate letter, to be divided among my employees and a few charities. I did not call to tell them. A week later, I changed my phone number. I instructed my receptionist not to put through any calls from unknown numbers. I told my lawyer that if David or Laura tried to contact me through legal channels, he was to respond politely, professionally, and without involving me unless absolutely necessary. In other words, I abandoned them. Not in anger, not in a burst of spite, but in a deliberate, methodical cutting of ties. Months passed. I heard about them indirectly, that they'd kept the house, that their financial situation had stabilized, though they still lived more modestly than before, that the kids stayed at their school. Once, standing in line at a grocery store on the other side of town, I heard 2 women talking about a man whose crazy father had bought his debt and made him sign away his inheritance. They laughed, shaking their heads. I didn't turn around. I did, however, get one final reminder that my decision had real effects. On a rainy November afternoon, a letter arrived at my house. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, written in a careful, looping script. Dear Grandpa, my name is Lily. I'm 13. Mom says you're her dad. Dad doesn't like it when we talk about you, but I found some old pictures in the attic and you're in them. You look kind. I also found some papers in Dad's desk. I know I shouldn't have read them, but I did. They said some things about you and how Mom and Dad left you when you were in trouble. It made me feel sick. Thank you for paying for my school. I don't know why you did that when they were so mean to you, but I'm glad you did. I like my school. I would like to meet you someday. I understand if you don't want to. Love, Lily. I sat at my table, the letter trembling in my hands, and felt tears sting my eyes for the first time in years. I didn't respond right away. I took a week to think, to talk with my lawyer about how to proceed without reigniting the old war. In the end, I wrote back. Not with accusations, not with bitterness, but with something new. A cautious offering of connection that bypassed the generation that had betrayed me. I told Lily about my work, about the houses I'd built, about her father as a little boy when he used to fall asleep on my chest in front of the television. I did not speak of money. I did not speak of abandonment. Those stories can wait until she is old enough to ask for them directly. As for Laura and David, I have kept my distance. No calls, no visits, no last-minute rescues. They live their lives. I live mine. Do I ever regret it? Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the wind rattles the windows, I think about the road not taken, about the version of this story where I simply wrote a check, welcomed them back, pretended the 7 years of silence never happened. In that version, they'd be sitting in my living room on holidays, laughing, telling stories, slipping little barbed comments into conversations. I'd be forever paying for the privilege of their company, always wondering if they were there for me or for my bank account. Instead, I sit alone. I drink my coffee in peace. I visit work sites and watch young men build their first futures with the same calloused hands I once had. I fund scholarships and see kids whose parents never had a chance hold their first acceptance letters. I write letters to a granddaughter who found the truth in a dusty attic. I chose respect over proximity, self-preservation over nostalgia. So here I am, an old man who went bankrupt, was abandoned, rebuilt his fortune, and then abandoned the people who once turned their backs on him. Some would call that justice. Others would call it cruelty in a suit and tie. What do you think? Am I a heartless old man who should have forgiven and forgotten, or was I finally right to walk away from the family that only came back when I became rich again?
My grandpa's worst really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.